the majority, we will bolster the long-term prospects for the liberty of conscience and the possibility that a Christian or a Jewish or an Islamic bioethics can be lived out in the real world. It's not just about the individual and the state. There is important space in between, and it's conferences like this one that can help nourish that space. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Professor Vischer. I think aside from just really the way law looks at issues and principles like autonomy and privacy in the legal terms meaning something altogether different than what lay people, even some of us might think of these days specifically. When we talk about privacy, we look at just FBI surveillance of Muslims. But beyond that, I think we don't, as providers, we often don't realize the degree to which law and the series of court cases really evolved our understanding of ethical considerations. When earlier court cases, when they discussed issues of termination of care, there wasn't literally any focus on futility of care, for example. So from a provider's point of view, that's a little bit counterintuitive. We really appreciate your comments. Let's move into a question and answer series. We have, I think, 10 plus minutes. Please go ahead.
With respect to the last speaker, I'm concerned, are there parallels between liberty of conscience and ethical imperialism? Parallels and perhaps perils. Thinking about the local perspective and the trend recently for Catholic hospitals like St. Joseph Mercy Hospital to buy up public hospitals like Chelsea Hospital and Celine Hospital, and then what are the implications for the ability of patients of diverse religious backgrounds to get the health care that they need. I think we have to be careful about allowing the focus to be shifted to individual conscience, because it seems then to be focusing away from the importance that physicians care for patients. And I think our focus as physicians needs to remain on the patient and not on the physician. Thank you.
Great. Great question. I rely on this audience to get right to the hardest point. The hardest point for me in terms of institutional identity is hospital mergers, right? Because I would say it's not just the fact that you have, for example, a Catholic healthcare provider who doesn't provide all services, because what you need to compare that to is the possibility of not having any healthcare provider at all in that community. That's the possible baseline. Mergers are harder, and I don't have a firm opinion on that. What I am not arguing for is, I'm not arguing to say that we should not pay any attention to securing access to goods and services that are deemed fundamental by the political community. What I am saying is, I would like the political community to make a deliberate judgment that this good or service is fundamental and we must ensure access to it now. What I see in many of the arguments in the pharmacists and other contexts is almost a dignity-based argument that an individual should not have to put up with claims from an institutional perspective or an individual provider perspective that inconvenience them in any way. So where this really came to the fore is in Illinois when they passed the rule requiring all pharmacies to provide all legal pharmaceuticals. It arose from a case where a woman was denied Plan B at a pharmacy in downtown Chicago, and there was one directly across the street she could have gone to get that same product. That's really what I'm pushing back against. I'm, for these purposes, agnostic about what goods and services are deemed fundamental. I have my own views, but what I would like to move towards is making that deliberate judgment that yes, this is a fundamental good or service, and then we can do things necessary to ensure access to it, rather than just have the default rule be all providers provide everything.
Thank you. both of you. My question is for the second speaker. And I wanted to invite you to speak a little bit about the role of gender in the world that you described, because every person who was turned away in your examples, including just your recent one, was female. And they were being refused contraceptives or abortion or whatever, or fertility services. So how does that fit into your analysis? Thanks.
Well, it fits into my analysis that if there's a perception that that women are being disempowered through the exercise of conscience by providers, I would want to ask the follow-up: disempowered in what way? If it's depriving of access to a good deemed fundamental, I think that the state should step in. In Washington State, for example, there was litigation about the new pharmacy rule, and the state in favor of the rule came in with 5 case studies of women who went out as test cases to try to obtain Plan B. In all of those cases, the woman obtained Plan B, right? In a couple of cases, they had to go to another pharmacist across town. In other cases, another pharmacist on duty helped them out. They all obtained that. So then I asked, okay, so what's the disempowerment? If it's a dignity-based disempowerment, I'm very concerned in a pluralistic society of using dignity-based concerns to impose one template on all providers. Not saying it can't be a good thing, but there are tremendous costs to it, and I would just be concerned. One quick follow-up. I'm not saying that these providers should be immune from marketplace reprisals for their conduct. If there's going to be a boycott or there's going to be protests, I'm all for that. That's how the market should work. What I'm leery about is the state closing down the conversation by coming in and just, shutting everything down. But great question. Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
Yes, thank you. It's more of a comment and a question, and it's for Dr. De Vries. My name is Aisha, and I'm from UK. You were talking about 3 modes of transport of bioethics, adoption, adaption, and then you were more open to conversation between cultures. Now, I'm doing field work, and I'm doing it in Pakistan, and I'm doing it in Lahore. And I'm also for that inductive approach to bioethics. And what I'm looking at is not just indigenization of bioethics, but the indigenous ethics at play, in the field, what it is. And Lahore is not bioethically enlightened, as I would put Karachi to be bioethically, where Dr. Muazzam is. And I've seen that there is a lot of heterogeneity. There's a lot of practice which is different. I've done 6 institutions, and all the institutions had different ways of dealing with problems of informed consent and communitarian consent and all that. And I come to the conclusion that the uncritical acceptance of the local practice, as well as the uncritical adoption of the ex-situ principles, are really not the way forward. What is needed is to look at what is happening on ground, and at the same time raising their awareness to other ethical perspectives. Because what I saw, and now on this I would like your opinion, what do you think that, the uncritical acceptance of what is happening on the ground, or the uncritical acceptance of the principles from, abroad, are really not the way forward? What would your comments be on that?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great question. It is a tension in the work I'm doing. In fact, some folks who work internationally on ethics issues, when they read my writing on this, say, you're opening the door to all sorts of abuses. And that in the past, companies have come from the West and said, oh, well, we just need the headman to sign, and everybody in his village can then participate in a research trial. And there's been serious negative effects of that. And I'm aware of that, and I see that as a tension. But my idea, and I have to admit to be something of an idealist and maybe an optimist, is that there's a conversation happens. And so it's not just, I think too often we can say, well, we're the imperialist West. We have to only listen and we can't say anything. I really see this as a dialogic process where we point out how certain values are being realized or not realized by a set of guidelines or ideas about how you regulate research or care given in health institutions and that sort of thing. So maybe I'm idealistic about that, but I think that's the beginning of saying it's not just what you do here. There are people doing things elsewhere, and people are being harmed by what you do according to my ideas. Can we have a conversation about that?
You know, I agree. That's exactly what I'm getting at. There should be a conversation between cultures rather than accepting what's going on in one place or importing, like you said, from other places. So that's what I meant, that I agree with this conversation between cultures and then adapting and adopting, no. First seeing what's happening down there, and if you see there's harm coming because of that, because, you know, my fieldwork showed that there were certain practices like, you know, if women wanted to come to get into a trial, like cancer drug trials, their husbands would not either bring them, you know, take them to other alternative. You know, we have a lot of alternative medicine there.
Yes.
You know, homeopathy, Dam, Darud and all, and then they would bring them towards the last stages. So that is where I thought the tension lay, that if only they were aware, or if the doctor could make them aware that it is her right to come, if she wants to come for a treatment, rather than just being, you know, told that, no, we'll go to other places, and then if all else fails. But then there were other practices where they would just listen to the, you know, the woman of the house, and if she wanted to do it, they would do it.
Yeah.
So I thought in both, you know, there was a lot of heterogeneity. So, you know, in both I thought that we should not be accepting everything that's happening there, but at the same time, we shouldn't be accepting everything that's happening abroad.
Well, let me add this. I think, you know, I'm a sociologist. I don't think I said that, or I'm not sure you said that. But when we think about religion, we often think about prophetic and priestly traditions. And I think in thinking about moral traditions, often the priestly somehow forgets the prophetic. And moral traditions can be used to criticize moral practices, so that certain moral traditions might have developed a way of being that is contrary to the prophetic tradition. And I think sometimes you can criticize from within the moral tradition and say, your tradition preaches respect. How is what you're doing being respectful of this woman? So those kind of things. I know Christianity better than Islam, and I know that you can criticize Christianity from the New Testament. Thank you.
Thank you for your question and perspective. Thank you, Dr. DeVries and Professor Vischer. I think time to move on to the next session.